Thanks, Michael. I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about Spotify's operations and strategy, specifically their key activities, resources, and partners, before Ashley's going to be diving in a little bit deeper about how Spotify goes to market. Now, first with key activities, Spotify's activities that are really critical are their software and platform development, contract negotiation, data mining and analysis, acquiring and developing new content, and marketing. Now, from a key resources perspective, we're looking at their platform and software, their content and their music contracts, and then user data and their employees. Next, we have their key partnerships, specifically their rights holders or the artists and music labels that own the rights to all of their music, the advertisers, and some key platform or key partnerships depend on the country as well, whether it's Facebook, Waze, or Hulu. Now, next, Ashley's going to be talking a little bit more about their go-to-market strategy.
Right. So when we think about Spotify and consider their customers, obviously we know the end users or listeners are the first, primary segment. But there's also two other ones. One is their advertisers, which support more of that free side of the business model. And then on top of that, there are the actual artists or content producers as well. And I'll talk more about what that actually means for us. But when we think about the channels, Spotify is available for download and available on pretty much any device at this point, where there were some conflicts along the way, but now they are available on iOS as well as Android, and then any device, desktop versus mobile platforms, everything. And the way that they reach their advertisers is a little bit different, and they have direct relationships with them, as well as the content producers. So they actually have created some tools that allows some independent creation of ads as well as content submission on that end. So those channels are kind of evolving as Spotify grows. And finally, now let's talk about those customer relationships. With the end user, it's looking like it's basically an independent use, right? It's pretty self-explanatory, user-friendly experience and interface. So if you have questions, there's a frequently asked questions box, but other than that, you can reach out to them with an inquiry. As far as the advertisers go, there's account relationships. Think about Google Ads, right? As the larger the ad budget and opportunity that they are going to be driving towards with Spotify, they have built in people to help support that. And same with content. So an individual independent artist can submit content as well as entire music labels in which there's major contracts, as Garrett mentioned. So what does all of that mean? What is the value proposition for each of these segments? So when we look at the end user, there's four things. One, it's this massive content, right? The reason they're not going to somebody else is because Spotify has the most. On top of that, the recommendation engine that Spotify has curated as they gain more data is actually driving users back to Spotify, similar to a Netflix model. Next, they also have the opportunity to engage with each other on a social aspect, which is driving all purchasing habits in the future, basically. And the last opportunity that Spotify offers their end users is the free versus paid, the freemium model. So on to our advertisers. Their value proposition for them is this massive database of data about listeners. It's the largest available currently and will continue to be that way. On top of that, they can provide analytics and diagnostics for each of their advertisers to really target the markets that they're looking for in a new and completely different way than most advertisers can. And then when it comes to the content creation and producers, they're, again, looking at this data and being able to tell them things like where they should have their next tour and what their listeners are actually interested in. So now that we kind of better understand the actual value proposition, what does this actually mean for the bottom line? Garrett's going to tell you.
Thanks, Ashley. Now, starting off with revenue streams, Spotify really only has two main revenue streams. One, their most used or highest margin would be the premium model, which makes up 90% of Spotify's revenue. Now, next, they do make 10% of their revenue on advertisements, and they have literally a dozen different ways that they advertise, but we won't get into too much detail from that. From a cost perspective, there's one main cost that dominates it, 70% of total cost for Spotify, and that's their licensing cost. So gaining either new content from new artists or working with the music studios to license out their existing content. And there's a couple of standard operating costs such as R&D, which is 10%, and sales and marketing, that is 12% of total revenue or total cost. Now, with that being said, we're going to hit the beach. Thank you very much. Let us know if we have any questions.